speaker, Dr. Chaitanya Shambekar. It's a great CV which I'm seeing, and he's a past president of the Nagpur Society. He's the chairman of the Infertility Committee of AMOX, executive member of the Maharashtra ISAR, member of the Infertility Endocrinology and Endoscopy Committee of FOXI. He's been the recipient of the Kamini Rao Yuva FOXI Oration Award. He's won several awards, gold medals, done so many orations in almost 50 Foxy societies, has been a faculty in various national level conferences, and is a great researcher, has published almost 15 articles in journals with 2 international publications, and has contributed chapters in almost 6 textbooks. He's a guide and mentor for MUHS and ICOG post PG fellowships at his Omega Hospital, and is a member of the PCP Committee in Nagpur. I would like to welcome Dr. Chaitanya to talk on the subject targeted investigations to fertility treatment.
Thank you, Dr. Shamila. And I would start screen sharing now. At the outset, I would like to thank AMOGS, Dr. Nandita Parshetkar, Dr. Arun Nayak, and Dr. Pratik Tambe for giving me this opportunity to speak on this very basic, but I think equally interesting topic. I bring greetings on the auspicious occasion of Mahashivratri, and we will start discussing about how to go ahead with the investigations of infertility. The first question is when to start investigations, and this is a question which everybody. So you have to begin after 12 months, which is a standard definition of infertility. So whenever a couple comes to you, if it's a 12-month duration, then you label it as infertile couple and you start investigating. But then there are some things which are changing nowadays. And it is said that if the age is more than 35 years, then you should start investigating within 6 months. If age is more than 40 years, which is now becoming common because of the late marriages, you should immediately evaluate the couple. And especially in Indian scenario, if the age is more than 32 years, you should start investigating within 6 months of marriage or sexual intercourse without protection. There are some points which I will discuss later, and that is regarding subfertility and unexplained infertility, which we will be discussing later on. So there is an article which appeared in Fertility and Sterility regarding ethnicity and diminished ovarian reserve, and it is said that ovarian age is 6 years ahead in Indians as compared to Spanish women. So if you compare Indians and Asians with the Caucasians, you'll find that in India, you should actually start investigating couple after 6 months of marriage if the age is more than 32 years, because their ovarian age is ahead, which is 6 years ahead of Spanish women. So the time is ticking and you should not waste time and should not wait for more than 6 months. So this is the message which is loud and clear. And we all should carry forward this message to the society, and you should start, you should marry early, and you should have childbearing as early as possible, especially in Indian ethnicity. So we were discussing about subfertility. And as I told you, subfertility is something which is any form of reduced fertility with prolonged time of unwanted non-conception. That means whenever the conception is wanted and the time taken is prolonged, you can actually start doing workup, and this period usually is of 6 months. So 6 months period is usually a period of subfertility where the patient is not a known case of infertility, but when you investigate such couples, you identify the problems and you will get 2 types of situation. One situation is there is absolutely no problem. That means the patient belongs to probably unexplained infertility group, and here you can afford to wait. And second is a major problem, like suppose there is a tubal block or the patient has got grade 4 endometriosis, where you cannot actually wait, you have to intervene. So in subfertility, the advantage is that it will avoid under treatment as well as over treatment. And that is the biggest advantage if you start just investigating the couple a bit earlier. Now, whom to offer investigations? Any patient who by definition is infertile or any patient who is at high risk of infertility should be offered investigations. Now, I'll give you the clinical scenarios in our day-to-day practice. This case is a case of Kalyani. Kalyani is married since 8 months. Her age is 33 years. Her mother was worried as according to her, it was late marriage. By the time she was 33, Kalyani was already 8 years old. So she asked Kalyani to consult her doctor, and Kalyani too is anxious because she wants to conceive early. Now, will you start investigating this patient? Yes, we will start investigating Kalyani because Kalyani is Indian She is 33. So we must investigate her even though she is married since only 8 months. So definition of infertility 1 year does not apply in case of Kalyani because she is Indian and she's already 33. So you should start investigating her right away. Isha. Isha is 23-year-old with irregular cycles. She's married since only 2 months, but she knows that she has a problem. She gets menses only after taking withdrawal. She's obese, she's hirsute, and she knows she is a case of PCO. So she's very anxious. Now, will you investigate her? The answer is yes. So Isha, though young, knows her problem and is high risk of infertility. And though married since only 2 months and still young, you should actually start investigating her because she might require some support for fertility treatment. Now, a case of Neha. Neha is a very typical situation. This is the situation which we see nowadays very often. The philosophy of Neha and her husband is life's best moments usually happen unplanned. So they are just not bothered about any planning for conception. They are not willing for investigation. Neha is 37 years. She is already advanced age, if you call it, as far as the fertility is concerned. She is married since 5 years, but she is just not interested in conception. She is a freelance journalist. Her husband is a travelogue writer, and they are busy with their profession. She is just not willing for conception. What is your role? Your role is to counsel them as advised by mother-in-law. As we know that mother-in-law, they come to us and they say, doctor जरा सांगा समजावा यांना या लोकांना काही इंटरेस्टच मुलगा नकोच आहे. So you have to investigate her. The answer is yes. And Neha, though Neha is not interested, it is your especially in Indians, that please marry early and please have childbearing as early as possible. Infertility group of Italy, they call it Infertilitali group, has given guidelines in January this year. And this is a very interesting article. Why? Because they have given practical, clinical, and diagnostic pathways for the investigation of the infertile couple. And we will just go how to go ahead with the investigation. The first thing first is to identify the risk factors. So you must know what is the risk factor. Like, though we know that the infertility is a problem of both husband and wife or male and female partners, there are several factors which are more common in some sexes. Like suppose you take consider age. Age is having more impact as far as females are concerned. So we are more anxious about the age factor in the females as compared to males. Though in males the fertility declines usually after the age of 50 years, we know that in women after 35 years there is a drastic reduction in the fertility, and after 40 years the reduction is more severe. There are many other factors like BMI, smoking, stress. Infection is becoming more and more common nowadays, especially in India. Tuberculosis was always there and is always there and will always remain there. PCOS is still important, but the new normal is diminished ovarian reserve. So you have to be extremely careful about the diminished reserve of the ovaries and the premature ovarian insufficiency in the patients who are coming to you for treatment. So this is a chart which actually gives you idea about the risk factors. So first thing to do is just identify the risk factors, like suppose age in females, the testicular cancer history in males, or testicular torsion in males, or smoking in males, or infertility with previous partner in both the partners. These are the things which will give you a clue that probably there is some problem and that's the reason why they are not conceiving. Now, after this, the thing which we usually tend to forget, and here I would like to give special mention on this, is that you should do general investigations of both the partners, because you have to treat them during pregnancy and you cannot just afford to, miss something like hemoglobinopathies, miss something like HIV or retrovirus infection. Or you should also do the cervical cancer screening, rubella screening, and especially if the age of the woman is more than 40, then you must do echo ECG and get a fitness from a physician, because especially in IVF we are getting more and more patients with advanced maternal age and they are having multiple problems, and therefore it is our policy at Omega Hospital that we always do echo and take a physician opinion from a cardiologist opinion before we go for IVF in patients where the age is more than 40 years. So this is something which we all should know, small thing but which matters a lot. So how do we proceed? Yeah, if you look at an infertile couple pathway, the pathway to pregnancy in infertile couple is usually long. It requires high level of resilience owing to several factors. These include medical procedures, economic cost, socio-economical factors, and psychological factors. So you need a multidisciplinary approach. You should have a gradual approach. You should not have haste in doing investigation. You should not look hasty. You should do it gradually. and you should reduce invasive procedures as far as possible, which are not necessary. So do not do invasive procedure unless they are indicated. So in females, the patient comes to you, you take the history, proper history of the patient, do examination and do transvaginal sonography. A good transvaginal sonography is something which is the preliminary investigation in any patient coming to you for infertility. Similarly, in males, you have to take history and you should do semen analysis, which should be as per WHO standard 2010 criteria and should be done from a proper person. And if required, you can do examination by andrologist and sonography from a sonologist. So this is how the male should be approached. So after doing semen analysis, proper history, examination, and sonography of the patient, you have to know what are the indications for immediate evaluation. Suppose that there is a male suspected male partner factor or male infertility, you should do immediate evaluation. If there is oligomenorrhea or amenorrhea to the patient, known or suspected uterine, tubal, or peritoneal diseases like tubal block or stage 3 and stage 4 endometriosis are the situations where you should do immediate evaluation. So you should know that these are the conditions where you just cannot afford to wait. You have to immediately start treatment. So how do you evaluate the patient? As I told you, the first three things which you have to do is history, proper examination, and ultrasound. After doing these three evaluation, you have to do pre-pregnancy evaluation as well, which includes the investigations, which includes the basic investigations, and then you should start investigating for the evaluation of the etiological factors of the infertility. So what are the etiological factors? The first category is diminished ovarian reserve or ovarian reserve testing. So you do ovarian reserve testing to know whether the patient has got PCOS or hyper response or diminished ovarian reserve. So you do an AMH level, you do FSH, you can do E2, you can do transvaginal sonography to know the ovarian reserve testing. Then second is ovulatory dysfunction. That means ovulation function test, which also includes ultrasound and serum progesterone level. Then tubal testing with the help of HSG and hysterosalpingo contrast sonography, and then uterine factors, which can be done with the help of sonography and if required hysteroscopy and if required hysterolaparoscopy. So that is how you evaluate. But what is important is test which should not be done routinely. क्या करना चाहिए, इससे ज्यादा हमें क्या नहीं करना चाहिए, ये पता रहना चाहिए. Because these are the tests which should not be routinely ordered, and if you routinely order them, then you are not a good fertility specialist. You are doing something which is not expected from you. So do not do laparoscopy for unexplained infertility. Do not do advanced sperm function testing unless it is required, like DNA fragmentation testing. Post-coital testing should not be done. Thrombophilia testing should not be done. Immunological testing like anti-nuclear antibody or antiphospholipid antibodies or anti-sperm antibodies should not be done unless it is required. Karyotyping should not be done. Endometrial biopsy, there is no role of endometrial biopsy, and prolactin level should also not be done unless there is some indication for doing this test. So these are this. You can take a screenshot of this slide because this slide is important, especially for those who are new in infertility practice. They should know what not to do. हमें क्या नहीं करना चाहिए, ये सबको पता रहना चाहिए. So before we proceed further, a word about unexplained infertility. This is a separate topic. 30% of the patients will have unexplained infertility. So you do testing of the patient. One tube is patent, at least one tube patent. Documentation of ovulation is there, and semen analysis reports are normal. You call this patient as a case of unexplained infertility, and you should explain the unexplained, that what to do and how to go ahead. Ideally, you should wait for 2 years, but most of the patients, it is not practical to wait. But the good news is that most of the patients, they conceive within 2 years, but you cannot afford to wait. So the guidelines say, especially the ASRM guidelines say, that you should do IUF for 3 to 4 cycles, followed by IVF if required, if there is no successful pregnancy after doing ovulation stimulation and IUI cycles. So that is what the guidelines say. Now we have to go ahead with the investigations. And while going ahead, you should have a protocol. You should have fixed ideas in your mind how to go ahead. And here you can divide this on the basis of time for offspring search or the duration of infertility, whether it is less than 12 months or more than 12 months. WHO says that couples should be divided based on the time of offspring search. And WHO recommends preconception care. This is very important. Whenever you are treating the patient, at the same time, start folic acid. Give them idea about the conception. Tell them about what to do and what not to do. So preconception care is something which should be started 3 to 6 months before trying for baby. And here you do three things, that is medical history, examination and ultrasonography, and start preconception care. So this is true when the couple comes to you with duration of infertility less than 12 months. If the duration is more than 12 months, so what will you do if it is more than 12? So if it is less than 12 months, you do this basic test and wait till the 12-month period is over. But if the patient comes to you and the duration of marriage is more than 12 months or duration of unprotected intercourse is more than 12 months, then you cannot wait. You have to do something for them. And in males, you have to investigate for infections. And in females, you have to investigate for ovarian reserve testing. So what we do, so this is how we go. If the duration is less than 12 months, just try to do the three basic things, find out the cause. If there is a cause, treat the cause. If there is no cause, wait for 12 months to finish. If the duration is more than 12 months, in females, try to find out the cause. If you don't find cause, do ovarian reserve testing. And in males, if you don't find any cause, do the infectious disease screening. And if you find that there is some infection, then treat the infection and then do the repeat testing and then start the treatment. So that is the way you should go ahead if the patient has got duration less than 12 months or more than 12 months. Now, as I told you, you are on crossroads. You have done three investigations. The patient is married since or trying since 12 months. More than 12 months period is over. Start ovarian reserve testing. And here you do AMH, FSH, antral follicle counts, and other things. And if you find that the patient has got diminished ovarian reserve, you should go for aggressive treatment. And that treatment is in the form of ART and, if required, of course, IVF. So age is crucial here in this situation. If particularly if the age is more than 35 years, then you cannot afford to wait. If ORT reports are normal, then here you have to consider two factors: the age of the patient and the duration of the unprotected intercourse. If the age is less than 35 years and the duration is less than 2 years, you can do tubal patency testing. And here the treatment or the investigation of choice is HSG or saline sonography and not laparoscopy. So HSG or saline sonography should be done, and then you can do IUI for 3 to 4 cycles. If the tubes are blocked on HSG, then of course you can go for laparoscopy, try to cannulate and open the tubes and go for IUI. And if the tubes are still blocked, you can go for IVF. Then, so this is the situation where the patient is married since less than 2 years and the age is less than 35 years. So you do the patency testing and do IUI and do laparoscopy if it is required and IVF if it is required. Now the next category, the third category, is where the patient's age is more than 35 years but it is less than 40 years. Here again, you have to do the patency test first, and you can try for IUI still in such cases, but not more than 3 cycles of IUI. So here, initially, I still remember we used to say do 6 cycles of IUI. Then the criteria was 4 cycles of IUI. And now, especially when the age is more than 35 years, you should not go beyond 3 cycles of IUI. This is something which should be clear in your mind. If the patient has got PID, patient has got hydrosalpinx or endometriosis, then you can do laparoscopy, do delinking, and go for IVF. So it all depends on the situation. So more than 35 years, you have to do the AMH and AFC. If they are normal, then tubal patency and then IUI for 3 cycles maximum, followed by IVF. If the age is more than 40 years, what will you do? There is no question of doing anything. The patient is straight away for IVF. You have to tell her that your age is more than 40 years. There is no point in wasting time. Go for immediate IVF treatment. Now some hormonal levels. Now this is about the flowcharts which we have discussed, the algorithms we have discussed now. Now we'll go into the details of some investigations. The first investigation is the blood investigation. And this is something which we all should know because day in and day out, we come across the patients and we have to look for the significance of each and every test. So what is the significance of FSH? FSH is something which is done on day 3 and the normal level of FSH is 4 to 8.9. If it is more than 9, that means there is diminished ovarian reserve. And if FSH is more than 25, you call it as premature ovarian insufficiency. That is the diagnosis of POI, FSH more than 25. E2 levels are done again on day 3. they should be between 30 to 80 picogram per ml. If more than 80, that means there is some functional cyst. If they are low, that means the patient has got WHO group 1 or group 3 category, and therefore they need treatment. E2 levels on the day of LH surge. This is important because you know that the follicles are formed and every follicle is secreting estrogen. So it is said that every mature follicle will secrete 150 to 200 picogram of E2, and therefore it should be minimum 200 on the day of LH surge, which means that ovulation is taking place. Then LH levels. Day 3 should be between 3 to 10. High LH level are suggestive of PCO. LH FSH ratio is something which we do not do nowadays, but high LH is suggestive of PCO, and low LH is suggestive of hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism. LH on the day of surge should be more than 20, which suggests ovulation within 48 hours. Prolactin is something which should not be routinely done. We have already discussed that, but prolactin levels are, if they are high, that is suggestive of prolactinoma. Progesterone levels are also equally important. In fact, they are very important because you don't expect progesterone to rise in the secretory phase and in the initial pre-ovulatory phase. And here on day 3, if the progesterone level is less than 1 nanogram per ml, that means the pregnancy rate will be low. And on the day of 21 day 21, where the ovulation has taken place, the progesterone level should be more than 5 nanogram per ml. And if it is more than 10, that is suggestive of adequate luteinization. AMH level can be done on any day of the cycle. That is the beauty of AMH. It should be between 1.2 to 3.5 nanogram per ml. And there is no universal consensus as far as the AMH levels are concerned. But if AMH levels are more than 3.5, we label it as PCO. And if it is more than 1.1, we label it as diminished ovarian reserve. TSH is something which should be between 0.3 to 5. But nowadays, the aim of the fertility specialist is to keep TSH levels below 2.5 so that there is no subclinical hypothyroidism. Now we have discussed all the criteria about the investigation protocols which we all should follow in our day-to-day practice. Now I'll ask you 3 questions. और ये 3 सवाल जो है ये 3 बहुत अहम सवाल है क्योंकि इन सवालों से हमें आगे का इन्वेस्टिगेशन का प्लान डिसाइड करना है. The first question is USG replacing most of the targeted test? The second question is, are day 2 hormonal assays losing its significance? And the third question is, are sperm function test replacing semen analysis test? And the answer is maybe yes. We don't know. We will discuss this. So the first thing is ultrasonography. And in ultrasound, it is said that the volume ultrasound with 3D, Paul Doppler, color Doppler, transsonography, and Sono AVC vocal ultrasound is supposed to be the best ultrasound. So we have got all these volume machines, volume ultrasound machines, which are becoming more and more popular nowadays because they give you idea about so many things, and they are so necessary in our day-to-day practice as far as fertility practice is concerned that they are actually replacing almost all the investigations. How they are replacing all the investigations, we'll discuss now. So what should be the approach? The patient comes to you, we say that the first 3 things which are there, basic things include ultrasound, history taking, examination, and transvaginal sonography. In TVS, we do a general TVS, which is done on any day whenever the patient comes to you, and then we do cycle assessment scans. And we must do ultrasound, cycle assessment scan, and ultrasound is not complete unless you do cycle assessment scan. That means you have to assess the patient in every stage of menstrual cycle, and then you come to know whether the things are going in the right direction or not. So here we go. The first thing is we put the probe inside and see the uterus, the position of the uterus, the size of the uterus, the shape of the uterus, whether it's anteverted or retroverted. See the surface of the uterus, see the myometrium, see the endometrium, and also see the adnexa. After doing this, we come to know about so many things. With 3D ultrasound, the uterine abnormalities are so nicely detected that it is said that it has got a maximum sensitivity and specificity. You see this chart, you will find that maximum sensitivity and specificity is there with volume ultrasound. So 3D volume ultrasound gives you the best result for the diagnosis of uterine anomalies. Second is fibroids. You do put the TVS and you do fibroid mapping. You can exactly do the FIGO classification of the fibroids with the help of TVS. You put the color and see the vascularity of the fibroid. You put the volume probe and see whether the fibroid is invading the cavity or not. And you do the Port Doppler and see whether the blood supply to the fibroid is reduced or not after giving treatment like GnRH analogs. So you come to know so many things. You see the blood supply, you see the invasion, you see the response to the treatment to the fibroids with the help of these beautiful machines which are now available in the market. In adenomyosis, you also will be able to see the asymmetrical thickness, so thickening of the wall. You will be able to see the Swiss cheese appearance, which is classical of adenomyosis. You will be able to see put the color, and you will be able to see the color flow in the adenomyoma, and you will be also be able to differentiate it from the fibroid. If you are not able to differentiate, then you may have to do MRI, but usually ultrasound can also help you differentiating adenomyoma from fibroid. Then you go to the endometrium and see the classical pear-shaped endometrium. You have to focus on the junctional zone, and this junctional zone has to be intact. See for the shape, the contour, and the disruption of junctional zone, if any, and you may be able to diagnose acute and chronic endometritis on ultrasound. If there is collection and increased vascularity in early stages, there is a increased vascularity, which is suggestive of acute endometritis. And in chronic endometritis, the endometrium becomes thin, it is avascular, and you may get calcified spots in the adnexa, which will give you idea about probably there is a chronic infection like tuberculosis or chronic endometritis. Endometrial thickness will give you idea about hyperplasia. You can see the polyps, the synecdoche on 3D ultrasound. The best thing to see for the polyps is to do the saline sonography, and you can actually see the polyp. Then 3D also gives you idea about the polyp, and then you put a color, and you will be able to see the stalk, and you will be able to see the feeding vessel inside. This is so nice. And if there is a Asherman syndrome with 3D ultrasound, you will be able to see the synecdoche in the best way. Then you see for the ovarian lesions like ovarian cyst, which is simple cyst, or you can see hemorrhagic cyst in the form of echogenicity. You get a classical ground glass appearance, which is suggestive of endometrioma, or you may get calcified spots and classical of dermoid cyst. So you will be able to see the adnexa and will be able to diagnose. And you will be also be able to see the tubal lesions where you see a classical sausage shape hydrosalping. You have to just change the direction of the probe, rotate the probe in such a way that this lesion becomes elongated. You see the incomplete septa, and you put the 3D, and you see such a nice picture of hydrosalpinx. So that is the beauty of ultrasound machine. There are some procedures which you can do: saline sonography, saline sonohysterography, hycosi, and saline infusion sonography, which will give you idea about the tubal patency and so many other things on ultrasound. So that is the reason why I said that you don't have to do HSG also nowadays because of hycosi and saline sonography. So you see the PCO or ovarian reserve, then you do endocrine evaluation. Fibroids, you may do hysteroscopy. You see hydrosalpinx, you may do laparoscopy. So you decide depending on the ultrasound picture how to go ahead. So ultrasound is such a important scan. Then on ultrasound, there is a cycle assessment scan. And unless, as I told you, you do cycle assessment scan, your sonography is not complete. So this is a baseline scan which is done on day 2 of menses. Then there is a pre-ovulatory scan and there is a secretory scan. So these are the 3 scans which are to be done. In a baseline scan, if you have a Sono AVC application in your machine, then you are able to see the follicles and antral follicles. So that is called as Sono AVC for AFC, where you will be able to see these antral follicles so nicely. And this is called as Sono AVC for AFC. You get actually the number of antral follicles which are there in a 3D view. That is the beauty of this machine on day 2. Along with that, you see the echogenicity of the stroma. You see if there is any cyst, and you will be able to classify ovary into 4 categories depending on how many follicles are there: normal ovary, PCO ovary, low reserve ovary, and a poor reserve ovary. Then you will be able to also be able to see the hyperechoic stroma, which is suggestive of PCO, or a stromal density, which is suggestive of PCO. And as I told you, Sono AVC for AFC is the best thing which can give you idea about so many things. Then you see the endometrium, it has to be thin. If it is thick, that means there is more functional cyst or maybe more estrogen, which is giving you thick endometrium on day 2 of scan. And you put a Doppler in the uterine artery and see the blood supply to the uterus. If RI is more than 0.79, which is suggestive of high resistance, then you will require high doses of gonadotropins for the stimulation. So see the clinical application. You put the Doppler in the color uterine artery, you see the resistance. If there is a resistance, that means you require high doses of gonadotropins. You on day 2, you come to know about the dosage of gonadotropins by doing uterine artery Doppler. So that is the beauty of the Doppler machine. Then comes the pre-ovulatory scan. You do the follicle testing. You see the dominant follicle, and this is the Sono AVC for AFC, enter follicle. So for Sono AVC for the follicle count, and this is something where you actually get idea about the number of follicles and size of each follicle. And then if the follicle is mature, it will be rounded. The margin will be thin. There will be no internal echoes. You will see that the Doppler flow is covering 3/4 of the follicle, and there is RI which is zero point 0.4 PSV. So that is the mature follicle. And if you put a 3D scan, 3D, you will get a nice cumulus cumulus complex or OCC, which can be seen. That means this is follicle which is about to rupture. You can also measure the volume of the follicle, which is normally between 3 to 7 cc. It should be normally dominant follicle should have 3 to 7 cc of volume. So this is what you come to know by Doppler. You see the endometrium, see the anatomy, see the pear-shaped endometrium. You can do the grading of the endometrium, whether it is hypoechoic or hypoechoic, and depending on that, you can come to know whether the endometrium is in the secretory or proliferative phase. And then you could do Appelbaum scoring, where you put the blood color Doppler and divide this into 4 zones: zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and zone 4. Zone 4 is something where vessels are reaching the endometrial cavity, and here you get the best results. So this is something which you do on the day of HCG to know whether the endometrium is receptive or not. So if the endometrium is grade 1 and zone 4, you will get best results. If endometrium is something like that, this where the endometrium is thin and the blood supply is not good, then the miscarriage rate is also very high. Patient will not conceive at all, and if she conceives, there will be a miscarriage. You can put 3D on the endometrium and see the color flow and see the volume of the endometrium. Volume of the endometrium is usually 3 to 7 ml, which is considered as favorable volume. Now, on the day of HCG, so this is something which you see, and then you do the secretory scan, see the corpus luteum and see the endometrium. The endometrium should be highly vascular, and corpus luteum should also be highly vascular, which suggests that the progesterone levels are high, and that means that the conception levels are high. If there is the endometrium is not vascular and the corpus luteum is not vascular, that means there is a luteal phase defect. So this is how you go. Human endocrinology and ultrasound can be correlated with each other. You don't have to do many investigations if you do ultrasound properly. If there is early recruitment of follicles, that means the patient has case of diminished ovarian reserve, FSH levels are high. If the thickness of the endometrium is very thick on the day 2 of menses, that means the estrogen levels are high and also progesterone levels are high. The stromal flow, if it is high on the day 2, that means the LH levels are high. That means she is a case of PCO. Echogenicity of stroma is more, that means LH levels are high. That means she is a case of PCO. If the androgen follicles are more, that means she is having high androgen levels. That means again PCO. And if there is a high uterine artery resistance, that means you require more doses of gonadotropins. So that is how endocrinology can be correlated with ultrasound. And then on pre-HCG scan, if there is a good perifollicular flow, that means E2 levels are high, and good endometrial thickness, that means adequate estrogen receptors are there. If the endometrium is fluffy, that means the exposure to progesterone is early and premature LH surge has taken place, and follicle wall is having increased echogenicity, that means again premature LH surge has taken place. In luteal phase scan, corpus luteum is having high vascularity, endometrium is having high vascularity, that means progesterone levels are good and the chances of conception are more. If the corpus luteum is not having good vascularity, that means there is a luteal phase defect, and low vascularity means inadequate progesterone levels, which means more chance of miscarriage or failure. So all these things can be concluded on ultrasound, and therefore I must say that ultrasound is here to stay and is actually replacing most of the investigations. Now I'll quickly go to the second question. और दूसरा सवाल है कि are day 2 assays losing their significance? What are day 2 assays which we do? Classically, we do FSH, we do E2, some people do LH, and we do antral follicle count. So these are the 4 things which are done on day 2 of menses. Now the advantages of this, they are time tested, they are age old. Since so many years, we are doing all these investigations. They are very cheap, but there are some disadvantages of day two investigations. One is that they are influenced by external factors. And secondly, the accuracy in prediction is not very good. The accuracy in prediction is less. That is a problem with day two test. So since last 5 years, there is a rise and rise of AMH as an investigation and marker for ovarian reserve testing. Change is the only thing which is constant, and this is a change which is for good. And the more and more people are now going for AMH as an investigation of choice for ovarian reserve testing. The AMH levels less than 1.1 is low, 1.1 to 3.5 is normal, and more than 3.5 is high. This is standard levels which we follow in our day-to-day practice. If you look at the intercycle and intracycle fluctuations, you will find that FSH and LH, they are fluctuating throughout the cycles, but AMH is not fluctuating throughout the cycle. And that is the beauty of this AMH. That is the advantage of AMH. You can do it at any time throughout the cycle. Second thing, if you do FSH and LH, you will find that they are influenced by the OC pills, by the GnRH agonists, or by the drugs which the patient has taken in the previous cycle. But in AMH, there is no influence of OC pills, there is no influence of gonadotropins, no influence of GnRH agonist on AMH levels. And that means AMH levels can be done irrespective of whether the patient is taking any treatment in the previous cycle or not. This is a very beautiful and nice diagram, which is a very famous diagram by Lamarca, which says that AMH has got its secretion at the level of primary, secondary, small preantral, and the antral follicles. So AMH has got this much of span of 120 days, while FSH dependence starts at a later stage, and therefore AMH has got its significance. And not only this, AMH will help you in reproductive life planning also, like means how many. It is an age independent marker. You know the AMH levels, you know so many things. Well, if you're planning for pregnancy, whether you should plan early or not. If you're planning for marriage, whether you should plan early or not. So in today's scenario, it is very logical. If you know the AMH levels, you can tell so many things about the patient, whether she is having diminished ovarian reserve, whether she should marry early, what are the chances of conception, so many things you come to know by AMH level. So if you have got an AMH level in your hand, with the and the patient comes to you with AMH level, you can actually work as a part-time palmist and tell her about her भविष्य, आगे क्या होने वाला है, तुमको कितने बच्चे होने हो सकते हैं, तो आपने कितनी जल्दी शादी करनी चाहिए, ये सब चीज हम लोग AMH के एक लेवल से बता सकते हैं. That is the advantage of AMH. So in IVF also or in ART also, AMH is a novel clinical marker of ovarian reserve response and response to gonadotropin. So if you know the AMH levels, you can decide the dosage of a gonadotropin. You can decide the treatment plan. You can decide whether the agonist cycle is better or antagonist cycle is better. You can decide whether you start with REC FSH or you start with HMG, you add LH. So many things you can decide. How much should be the starting dose of gonadotropins and what is the expected response or anticipated response. All these things you come to know from AMH levels. So you get quantitative and qualitative response in ART if you know the AMH levels. And this is a chart, and I feel all the newcomers, especially those who are new in fertility practice, they should take a screenshot of this beautiful chart, which gives you idea about the various ovarian reserve testing markers and their significance. Age, AMH, FSH, and AFC are the four markers. Prediction of poor response. Age is good, AMH is very good, because even in young age the patient can have poor response. FSH is okay, AFC is good. Prediction of hyper response, here FSH is of no use, but AMH is really good. PCO you can diagnose on AMH levels, you cannot diagnose PCO on FSH levels. Low intracycle variability, this is the beauty of AMH, which is not seen with FSH. You cannot do FSH at any time, and you cannot do FSH if the patient is already on OC pills in the previous cycle. Operator blinded to operator, ultrasound is the problem. If you have a good sonologist, then you get good results. As we have discussed, all these things which we have discussed in sonography, they are possible only if you have a very good man behind the machine. So the man behind the machine is important. Your eyes see what your mind knows. So unless you know, you will not be able to see anything. So you need a good operator, good sonologist to know so many things which are there in fertility practice. And therefore, and as far as cost is concerned, age is the cheapest one, provided the patient tells her correct age. If the patient does not tell her correct age, then age is also of no use. But otherwise, you will find that image is one of the best markers of ovarian reserve testing of all the markers which are available in today's scenario. So, in conclusion, yes, day 2 hormonal assays are losing its significance. AIM is slowly but surely replacing FSH level assays. FSH and LH estimation will soon be history. And AIM is one of the best markers of ovarian reserve. It does not predict pregnancy, and no one can predict pregnancy. And AIMH also does not predict pregnancy, but it is a good marker. अब तीसरा सवाल, I think Pratik, I have 5 minutes. Hello, should I continue?
Yes, sir.
Pratik?
If you could please conclude quickly because we need time for the Q&A also.
So shall I conclude in 5 minutes?
Yes, sir, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So तीसरा सवाल है regarding semen analysis. Semen analysis alone is sufficient, or we need to do sperm function test to do in all male partners. So our problem with gynecologists is we ignore male partner, we do not take proper history, and we should have a protocol. We should talk to the patient, take proper history, and take the help of a sonologist, sexologist, urologist, etc. And you should actually follow a protocol. You should go beyond semen analysis, and you should take medical and sexual history, physical examination, ultrasound, endocrinological evaluation, karyotyping, Y chromosome microdeletion, genetics, sperm function test, testicular biopsy, and post ejaculation urine examination. This is a protocol which we all should follow. And even though we are not doing all these things, we should know all these things, because whenever we are treating a male partner, we should be aware of how to go ahead with the infertility treatment in male partner. The problem is the male factor is on rise and rise and rise. The question is, where have all the cowboys gone? And this is really a serious question. And we all should actually think about this, that why the sperm count is going down and why the problem of male infertility is on rise. It is said that nothing succeeds like normal semen analysis report. If you have if the patient belongs to a elite 100 million club, more than 100 million sperm count, then there is absolutely no problem, and there is no need to do anything except the patient has got performance pressure and performance erectile dysfunction. Then there is a problem. Otherwise, semen analysis good report means कुछ करने की जरूरत नहीं है. But the problem is that semen analysis is done by inexperienced persons, and it is very easy to do this test badly, and that is the problem. Therefore, you must insist on doing the semen analysis from a person who is expert and who is following WHO 2010 criteria for semen analysis. And these criteria are important. We all know this criteria, so I'll not go into details of this criteria. But we should know that even this WHO 2010 criteria has got limitations. Some people say that this is not a very good criteria because it is done only from 8 countries. The abstinence period is not good. Only one analysis is performed. Cutoff is 5th percentile, and sperm concentration is not done properly. And therefore, many studies and many special interest groups have come, and they have said there is a estrus special interest group, and this estrus special interest group says that there are many limitations of WHO 2010 classification, and so you should go beyond semen analysis. So this is a paper which says that prediction of male infertility by the WHO laboratory manual for assessment is not good, and it cannot be used to predict fertility unless and except the patient has got azoospermia, necrospermia, or globospermia. These are the conditions where the patient cannot conceive. But otherwise, WHO criteria is not alone is not sufficient. So if alone, it is not sufficient alone, then what you should do? There are many studies which say that you should do something more beyond semen analysis. Some people say that total motile sperm count is better. Now it is proved beyond doubt that total motile sperm count is a better indicator for the severity of male factor infertility. And then there are advanced sperm testing. These testing are oxidative stress evaluation, DNA fragmentation test, hypoosmotic swearing test, anti-sperm antibody testing, teratozoospermia index, and CASA. All these tests have got their own significance, and the hypoosmotic swearing test give you idea about the vitality of the sperm. Anti-sperm antibody testing is done whenever you are anticipating some immunological factors, like the patient has got say history of torsion or history of trauma or vasectomy, or the patient has got unexplained infertility or recurrent implantation failure, recurrent pregnancy loss. You should do anti-sperm antibody testing. Sperm DNA fragmentation is becoming more and more popular nowadays, and it is said it is not done routinely in semen analysis, but it is said that it is because of the oxidative damage, stress, or damage to the sperms that the DNA fragmentation of the sperm increases. And with the increase in DNA fragmentation, the problem of infertility is on the rise. and therefore it is said there are many tests like tunnel test and comet test which are done. It is said that if the sperm DNA fragmentation is less than 15%, you get the best results. If it is 15 to 30%, you get good to fair results, and if it is more than 30%, then you get poor results. There is something called as stereozoospermia index, which is also important for the patient's semen analysis, and there is a CASA, which is said to be not very good because it was initially it was very popular, but now accuracy is in doubt because it is expensive machine and it requires good technicians, and it does not yield much of the information. Therefore, the grade A evidence says that CASA is not superior to conventional semen analysis. Now, the $1,000,000 question is: do sperm function tests improve the efficacy, and it should be done in all the patients? The answer is it should not be done in all the patients because it is expensive, it is complex, and may not affect treatment. So, where will you do sperm DNA fragmentation testing and anti-nuclear antibody testing and other testing of sperm function test? You will do this in particular situations. Like patient has got recurrent pregnancy loss, patient has got unexplained infertility, the patient has got recurrent implantation failures, the patient has got immunological factors. These are the situations where you do sperm function test. So yes, the answer is sperm function tests do have the role to play, and especially SFTs are important whenever you have to take the decision of the right choice of treatment. Suppose you are in dilemma, you are on crossroad, whether to go for IUI or to go for ICSI, then you have to take the help of this sperm function test. So again, this is a chart, and I think you all should take the screenshot of this chart as well, because it beautifully gives you idea about whether various sperm parameters which can be used in the management of the patient or treatment plan of the patient. Sperm concentration more than 10 million IUI, less than 1 million ICSI. Total motor sperm count more than 5 million IUI, 1 to 5 million IVF, less than 1 million ICSI. 24-hour sperm survival more than 70% IUI, less than 70% ICSI. TZI less than 1.6 IUI, more than 1.8 for ICSI. Hypoosmotic swelling test more than 58% or 60% IUI, more less than 50% ICSI. And the most important, DNA fragmentation index more than 30% ICSI, more than 60% TESA ICSI, less than 15% IUI. So you can take the decision depending on the parameters how to go ahead in the treatment plan. So that is the beauty, and that is the best part of the sperm function test. So I'll sum up my topic or talk with the ACOG, ASRM, and other recommendations regarding the best fertility practices and how to go ahead with the infertility workup. Infertility evaluation to any patient who has more than 12 months of infertility should be done. If the age is more than 35, you should start evaluation within 6 months. If age is more than 40 years, then you should do immediate evaluation. Condition known to cause infertility, you should do immediate evaluation. You should take a history first, do physical examination and ultrasound, and then only you should go for ovarian reserve testing, ovulation function test, and structural abnormality testing. So you first do three things and then do other things. That is how you should go. Get proper history and semen analysis of a male partner from a proper person according to WHO 2010 criteria. Take help of andrologist in male factor SOS whenever required. Some other recommendations: do pre-pregnancy counseling in all women. That is what I have already told you. You take this period, take the advantage of this period and do pre-pregnancy counseling. In view of fast ovarian aging in Indian women, do start investigations after 6 months of married life if the age is more than 32 years. In India, thyroid testing is recommended in all patients because of the high incidence of thyroid disorders in India. Check mid-luteal progesterone levels to assess ovulation, but this is grade 4 evidence, grade C level 4 evidence, and use ultrasound, which is grade B evidence. So ultrasound is, I think, better than progesterone levels. Endometrial biopsy should not be done unless and until you are suspecting malignancy or you are suspecting infections. Do ORT if more than 32 years at risk, and if less than 32 years, you should do if there is risk of infertility. Do ORT in all patients of IVF to predict the response. Do HSG first for tubal patency. Laparoscopy is not routinely recommended. Laparoscopy done only in cases of tubal block, endometriosis, or PID, and do not do hysteroscopy unless and until it is indicated. So only indicated you do hysteroscopy. Again, semen analysis from a proper person, that is something which we all should remember. So to sum up, friends, to make a difference in someone's life, you don't have to be brilliant, rich, beautiful, or perfect. You just have to care. So in infertility practice, you should remember, don't quit, just do it, and ultimately you get results. So I thank you all for patient listening. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Pratik, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Amox.
Thank you, Dr. Chaitanya, sir. I
Actually,
think it was, yeah. Yeah, Chamila, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pardeshi sir and Dr. Pratik Tambe for giving this chance to listen to great talks. It was like listening to an oration from both of them, and so comprehensive, but you made it so simple. Could see the passion which you bring it almost like you were teaching a class. It was wonderful to listen to that. And actually, we have done one multicentric trial on ovarian reserve in India. We did from 10 centers throughout India from all the zones of the country. And it was a very simple study. We just wanted to find out what were the factors which was affecting the ovarian reserve in Indian women. And what you said was the answer. Like, age of the lady is much younger in in an Indian population. The years of infertility matters in Indian population. And we found out that diet, your ethnicity, nothing matters, but age and years of infertility is the one which matters in Indian population. And that will come for publication in a month. Actually, we did it from all the zones of the country. We had Dr. Sonia Malik, Dr. Asha Bakshi, and from East Zone we had the IAH also there. So you will get it soon. And it was wonderful listening to you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pratik, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chaitanya. I think it was an excellent deliberation. And you just so nicely you brought out the points, like where we need to intervene and where we just need to counsel. She's not aware, but she is a high risk and we need to wake her up. So that was very nice. And the other thing was the targeted approach, the 5 points that you brought up. Women more than 35, expedite your evaluation. More than 40, just do imaging. Comprehensive medical history, targeted physical, and test has to be focused. And the 5 points, the ovaries, tubes, and the uterus, and of course the dysfunction and the semen analysis. So that was really, really wonderful. And the do's and don'ts. And it really brought us to an overview, really sitting and just doing in action. So it was really wonderful listening to you, sir.
Thank you,
and I think, Dr. Pratik, I could take up some questions and queries from the audience.
Yeah, there are some
And
audience
Dr.
questions for the first
Kiran?
speaker. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. And I think both the speakers were really fantastic. So Dr. Kiran Sonwalkar asked that what possibility of mother and father RH negative and the baby born with positive blood group and vice versa?
Of course, there is possibility of extramarital affair. And one thing is about DU positive, which is weak positive. And it can cause immunization or sensitization of the mother. So it is possible.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And ABO incompatibility and the role of anti-D.
Immune? Pardon?
I think this has already been brought out. I'll go to the next question. Many patients avoid taking anti-D despite indication or prescription due to low socioeconomic conditions, and how do we deal with it?
There is proposal of collaboration between government and NGOs. Even the companies like BSV are providing anti-D to the government centers, and we can avail anti-D from that centers.
Right, sir. And is it rational to do IDCT in positive blood group mothers too?
Yes. ICT should be done in all cases at the first visit is one recommendation. Though it is very, very rare to find it positive in RH positive mothers, but there are some uncommon blood groups which we are not testing routinely. So ICT should be done at first visit. It is the most simple test, very cost-effective test, which is very low-cost test. And if offered, we can minimize the HDFN in the newborns.
Thank you, sir. And if facility for fetal-maternal hemorrhage is not available, we presume more loss than normal. Can we increase the dose of anti-D? And I think that you've highlighted very well. And is flow cytometry available in India?
It is available at some centers in Mumbai, but I don't know about other centers.
Right. So if there's a patient who's Gravida 3, which RH negative and not taken NTD any of the pregnancies, she's come to us at 20 weeks at the first visit and the ICT was negative. Do we give the NTD there itself or do another at 28 weeks?
She is very fortunate to have ICT negative, and she is the most ideal candidate for NTD prophylaxis. We should offer her NTD prophylaxis, but it should be given at 28 weeks by repeating the ICT test at 28 weeks.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. And if Dr. Chaitanya, if there is a persistent cyst of 18 millimeters, it's persisting since the last 3 months and on a day 2 scan, then how do we proceed? Do we still wait or any other option?
Yes, the
For
most
an
important
ovulation
thing is,
induction.
yeah, the most important thing is, I think, to see whether it is functional cyst or not. So put a Doppler flow, and you can try a couple of cycles of OC pills. And I feel that if it is persistent, if it is small cyst, then you can go ahead with ovulation induction.
Yeah, I think less than 2 centimeters, we could
You
still
can go ahead.
consider it, sir. And you said FSH and AMH, yes, a beautiful comparison in them. But should we really go in for FSH or not at all?
Frankly speaking, we have stopped doing FSH, but still many people, they do it because there are, the FSH is considered as gold standard. In fact, if you look at the SRA guidelines of premature ovarian insufficiency, they have categorically said that FSH more than 25 is POI, but they have not mentioned about AMH. So, and the problem with AMH is still is not accepted because of the cost factors, and AMH is becoming more and more reliable. But still, and I have seen many. In fact, we did a telephonic survey last year with all gynecologists around in and around Nagpur, and we found that there are still many gynecologists who do both FSH and AMH both, just to confirm and reassure that the AMH levels are giving the correct diagnosis. And of course, AFC is always there.
And if there's a patient and has got 3 semen sample reports with him as azoospermia, and the FSH and testosterone was done, testosterone was normal, and the FSH was 11.8, do we now counsel that he can go for a testicular biopsy or not, seeing to the FSH levels?
We should. In fact, if it is less than double of normal, we should go for testicular biopsy. So testosterone. So we, in fact, to be very frank, the testicular biopsy is something where many people don't know that testicular biopsy is something which should be done with the facility of cryopreservation for the sperms. Because if you do testicular biopsy, you get the report and you are damaging the testes and doing the fibrosis to the testes, and which may have its impact on in future treatment. So whenever you do testicular biopsy in a patient, you should have a facility for cryopreservation, or else if it is really not required, you should avoid testicular biopsy and straight away go for testicular sperm extraction and go for IVF.
And something as sporadic, I think spermatogenesis also.
Yes, it is always there.
Consideration. Yeah. And so if there's another patient who's got 4 IUIs done, and now we want to go in for an IVF because of the failed 4 cycles, and should we advise, has got a semen count of 110 million and 50% motility, actively motile, should we advise a DNA fragmentation test before going for an IVF?
In fact, this is the patient where DNA fragmentation has got a role to play, because the patient has got normal semen analysis report and still the patient is not is having IUI failures. So you need to go beyond semen analysis, and this is the situation where you should do DNA fragmentation testing. And DNA fragmentation test not only gives you idea about, suppose the DNA fragmentation is very high, you can actually go for testicular sperm extraction where the sperms are not crossing epididymis. The damage, oxidative damage is less, and you get better quality sperms. The abstinence should be low. That is one more thing. And the second thing is testicular sperm extraction, which is going to give us good sperms, good quality sperms.
So I think if there are no more of questions, Dr. Pratik, both the speakers really fantastic deliberations, we must say, and it was a treat, listening to both of them. So thank you so much, and also my co-chairpersons also for the same.
Thank you very much to all the stalwarts who are present today, despite it being a holiday. Since there are no more audience questions, there are one or two comments from the audience. I think Dr. Kiran Sinha from Kanpur has logged in and she said excellent deliberations and two fantastic talks, especially Chaitanya. She's given you a lot of appreciation. So thank you, ma'am, for logging in. And it's wonderful to know that though this is an AMOX platform, we've managed
I think some problem with some net problem with Pratik, it seems.
I'm sorry for the interruption. There's some network issue with Dr. Pati. If you can just bear for another 2 minutes. We can continue.
Yes, Pratik.
So I think the glitch in the internet, so apologies for that. It's my proud privilege to present the official vote of thanks. Thank you to our esteemed President, Dr. Nandita Palchetkar, Secretary, Dr. Arun Nayak, three amazing chairpersons, Dr. Rajendra Singh Pardeshi, our Vice President, Dr. Charmila from the South, Dr. Ritu Khanna from the East. Wonderful comments and insight into both the talks for today. Thank you very much to our two esteemed speakers, Dr. Sagar Kataria, Zonal Coordinator of AMOGS, and Dr. Chaitanya Shembekar, my co-chairperson, chair for the Infertility Committee of AMOGS. Thank you so much for your wonderful talks. I would also like to present my gratitude to the ICOG chairperson, Dr. Mandakini Megh, the secretary of ICOG, Dr. Parag Bidiwale, for granting us the ICOG credit point, to Science Integra for their wonderful academic support, always there in the background. Subbu, Shrimon, Session, thank you so much for all your help. Our academic partners for today, Bharat Serums and Vaccines, the Feminora Division, and the Bridging Bharat initiative, through which we have done this entire series of events over the past 1 year. We hope to see all of you very soon. We had an audience of nearly 400 which had logged in today. And thank you so much, audience, for being here. We hope to see all of you very soon at the next event. Thank you so much. Goodbye. God bless. Stay safe.
Thank you, Dr. Pratik.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr.
Thank you, Pratik.
Chaitanya and Dr. Sagar, Dr.
Thank you,
Chamila and
Dr.
Dr. Padesi, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. It was nice
Nice and
opportunity.
big crowds.